You are listening to Real Life and Other Fantasies, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello, fellow storytellers, and welcome to this edition of Real Life and Other Fantasies. Our guest for this episode is less political than Mike Pence, not as high-strung as Hunter Pence, and more valuable than a sixpence. For this episode, I'm pleased to welcome James Pence. How are you doing today, James?
I'm great. Yeah, thank you for having me on. I've heard the Pence comparison many times and often been asked if we were related to the vice president. And I always used to say, well, if you ask my mother, yes. If you ask my sister, maybe. If you ask me, it's like I wasn't invited to any inauguration, so I'm pretty sure I wasn't related.
All right, just so my audience knows who my guest is today, James Pence is a motivational speaker, author, singer, chalk artist, and an actor. He's here today to tell us some incredible stories he has personally lived and share a dose of optimism that will hopefully leave you inspired. Let's start with your singing, James, because you had something cool happen this year. Can you tell it what it was like making the finals of a singing competition in April and how it led to you fulfilling a lifetime dream of performing in musical theater just this past summer?
Yes, this was such an exciting year. I had a massive heart attack back in 21 and pretty much, actually even before that, because of the COVID lockdown, hadn't really sung in public. I've been singing since I was a kid and have done a lot of public singing, but my voice had gotten pretty bad. Just I hadn't sung, I hadn't exercised my voice, I hadn't done anything. And then in early this year, there were signs up all over town for something called the Voice of Hunt County. And it was to be a singing competition patterned after the Voice TV show. And I went back and forth and really wasn't going to mess with it because I didn't want to go to all the work. But then I realized, again, I haven't sung and my voice has just been kind of in rags. So I made an audition tape and sent it in, and about 60 people had auditioned, and I figured, well, my chances aren't very good at all. But I ended up being one of the 20 chosen to be in the competition. And then once that happened, I went into serious training, singing for an hour to 2 hours a day, practicing to get my voice because I'd lost so much range. I have normally a really good range of highs and lows, and my highs were gone. And so I worked and got back to just about peak. And the week before the performance, I got a bad cold and throat infection and literally lost my voice the week before, and was about to try to drop out of the competition because I didn't think I'd be able to sing. And that week I found some videos on YouTube from a teacher that described how to recover your voice if you were having allergy or cold problems. And so I spent that whole week prior to the competition rehabbing and was at about 80% on the first night of competition. And my goal was to go into it, and if one of the three judges turned around, I was going to be happy because that was going to be my validation. I didn't really care whether I won, because the second night was going to be all about voting, and to win the competition, you really had to have a lot of people in your corner voting for you. And so anyway, I performed that first night, and actually two of the three judges turned around, and I was the only contestant that had two judges want want me, and I chose a judge who specializes in musical theater to be my mentor. And so the next day we went through the mentor process, and the second day of competition, I made the top 12. I didn't win the competition, but a week later, or it was 2 weeks later, I was invited along with a number of the other competitors to sing at another local theater called the Texan Theater, and just to sing some of the songs that we had done during the week. And that week, during that day, just before we sang, there was a small number of the cast from a local production of The Music Man that were doing a demonstration, and we followed up on them. And after the performance, the choreographer from The Music Man asked if I would be interested in playing Mayor Shin, one of the main characters and kind of the comic relief adversary. And that show particularly is one that has been one of my favorite shows from the time I was about 5 years old. And I knew the music from the time I was a very young child. And so I was delighted and plugged into that show and had the time of my life and worked my tail off, because I have never rehearsed so much or so long for one thing, but it was a great time.
That's awesome. That sounds like fun. So you call that singing opportunity the fulfillment of a lifetime dream for you.
Yes.
And unfortunately, you almost didn't live long enough to see that wish fulfilled. Can you tell us what happened? You sort of referenced it earlier, but can you give us more details of what happened to you in 2021?
Yes, in January of 21, January 27th, at 4 o'clock in the morning, my wife found me in the bathroom. I was dry heaving, and she thought I just had food poisoning or something, and she helped me back to the bed. And I remember none of this. This is all what's been told to me. I said, I don't know why I feel like this, and I keeled over. And she knew she could tell I wasn't breathing well, and our daughter lives right next door, and she called our daughter, and our daughter works in Rockwall, about 30 miles away, as a dental assistant. So she always has to get up really early in the morning to get ready for work. And so our daughter came right over and started CPR on me. And she had to do about 15 minutes of CPR until the volunteer fire department showed up. And they continued for another probably 30 minutes before the EMTs got
Wow.
there. We live way out in the country. And the EMTs got there, took me to, or put me on the ambulance, took me to Commerce, which is a small town nearby. And they had an ER there, but they shocked me 5 times on the way to Commerce, and were continuing CPR that whole time. And then finally, when they got me in the ER, they were able to get a rhythm started. But they eventually transferred me to Greenville, Texas Hospital. And I was there. It was another 12 hours before the doctor even decided to do a procedure, because he was pretty much convinced that I was gone, that there wasn't much chance of me surviving. And finally, they did do a cath and put a stent in my what's called my widowmaker artery, and they did that and put me on a bunch of drugs. And the doctor essentially said, well, I've done everything I can do. And they flew me to Dallas, care flighted me to Dallas, Medical City Heart. And they picked it up from there and brought me back, basically. It's, it's one of those things where there's no logical explanation. I shouldn't be here, and I certainly shouldn't be functional because of the amount of time that I was without a heartbeat. But God had other plans, I guess. That's
incredible.
Yeah, I had to rehab for quite a while, and it took me a couple of years to really come back. And that's like referencing the singing competition. I kind of looked at that as my comeback from the heart attack. That and doing the Music Man. I figured if I could handle that kind of stress, I had pretty much recovered. So,
wow. Yeah, we're thankful you survived that ordeal. That's pretty scary stuff. However, some people aren't obviously as fortunate and become a tragedy, or they must face a separate type of tragedy involving different family members or friends.
yes.
And you unfortunately also know that side of things because you and your wife lost a daughter. Sad to say.
Yes.
Can you tell us about your daughter and how you use that experience to minister to other people?
Yes, this was back in 1987. We were expecting our first child, and we're quite excited about, obviously, our first baby. And we went in to have the sonogram, and the doctor kept coming back to the baby's head, and I noticed even what looked like a little bump on top of the baby's head as he would move the wand over that way. And at the end of the appointment, he said, "Well, I want you to have a high resolution sonogram." Back then, that was kind of a specialty. Now it's routine, but he said it's probably nothing, but we want to check. And so anyway, long story short, we went and had the high resolution sonogram done, and about a week later, the doctor called us and said that the baby, just there were developmental issues that were not going to allow the baby to survive after she was born very long. And as I was a pastor at the time, and we both felt that it's an individual choice, but we both felt that it was, abortion really wasn't an option for us. So we continued to take the baby to term. And that was one of the most interesting experiences, because during that 20 weeks that we carried a baby, and I say we, it was my wife who carried the baby, but during that 20 weeks, we knew we were going to lose her, but we still had to go through all of the things that a parent has to go through, childbirth classes, things like that. And people, when you have, when you're expecting a baby, people, it's like barriers go away, and people become unusually forward. They'll walk up and
Yes.
touch the pregnant mother's belly without permission often, and it's like no barriers left, and they'll ask questions like what do you want to name the baby, or do you want a boy or a girl? And every one of those questions was kind of like a knife, because we couldn't, I didn't want to say, well, the baby's going to die, are you happy? You just don't do that to people, because they're not trying to be hurtful. They're just trying to be nice and share in your joy. So every time that happened, it was just like one more stab. And when the time came, my wife Laurel ended up having to have a C-section because the baby was breech. And then originally they told us she probably wouldn't live more than a few hours, but we had asked to donate her organs if possible, and so they had put her on a ventilator, and it turned out that her organs weren't well enough developed to be able to be used for donations, but she didn't show any signs of losing ground. They weaned her off the ventilator, and she was still hanging in there. And so Laurel said, I'd really like to take her home if we can. And that was really kind of an amazing thing because the doctors were very supportive of us and said, "Sure, we'll help you with that." They set us up with home health. We were able to bring her home, and we were able to keep her for a whole week. She died a week after she was born. But that was a transformative experience for both of us. In my wife's case, she's a registered nurse, and she had been working and specializing in geriatric care. She'd worked in nursing homes and with older patients, and she changed her specialty to working with neonates and worked in a hospital nursery after that. And so she was able very often to comfort and minister to parents who were in pain, who were losing a child. And in my case, I said, once we get through this, I'm going to write a book about this. And I never actually did write that book, but that event set me on the path to becoming a writer. And I did write an article. It was one of my first published articles, and it's up on my website, called Road Not Chosen. And it tells briefly the story of Michelle, our daughter. But that set me on the path to becoming a writer, and I began studying fiction writing because I always loved writing stories, and I went on from there to write about 11 books. So still haven't written the book about our story, but maybe someday.
I'm going to come back around to your books in just a moment.
Okay.
But first, I want to talk about another daughter, your daughter's best friend, who was involved in a gruesome situation. Can you tell us about that one?
Yes. This happened in roughly around 2007 to 2008. This is something that isn't usually seen on my website or my bio. I taught karate for 10 years. My son and I earned our black belts when he was growing up, and I started a class for homeschoolers. And a family named the Caffeys came to our homeschool class, and my daughter was about the same age. She was about a year younger than Aaron Caffey, but they became very good friends. And Aaron would come over to our house. She would come and visit. Charlene, our daughter, would go to her house. And even in the summer of 2007, we took Aaron with us to summer camp down in Louisiana, where we, at that time, would go every year. And so there was just a nice, close friendship. It was March 1st of 2008. We were at church, and I got a telephone call from the owner of the karate school where I taught, and he happened to live in the same community that Erin and her parents and her two brothers lived in. And they said somebody broke into the Caffey's house and basically killed the family and set the house on fire. And this was the first reports that I had gotten. So on our ride home, Laurel was able to call our friends and find out more details. And we found out that Terry Caffey, the dad, and Aaron Caffey had both survived, and Terry's wife Penny and the two boys, Tyler and Bubba is what we call the older boy, they had not survived. And at that moment, I felt kind of a sense of relief because as bad as the tragedy was, I knew Charlene's friend had survived. So that would maybe cushion the blow a little bit when we got home and had to break the news to her. And just before we broke the news, well, it wasn't just before, it actually happened after, we broke the news to our daughter. And of course it was very rough. But then probably an hour or two later, I was online and I saw a news report that Aaron had been implicated in the murders, and that she had actually been somehow involved. And again, at that point, we knew very, very little. And as more information came out, we found out that Erin and her boyfriend and another young man and another young lady had all been involved in the process. And it boiled down to Erin's parents had made her break up with her boyfriend. And so this was kind of in retaliation for that. And it was a devastating experience for all of us, but of course for Terry and his Terry and the rest of his family and Erin's family. It was just overwhelming. And that was that was 2008.
And there was a book about this written, or an article in Texas Monthly, I believe you mentioned.
There was a book, an article. There was quite a few. This case made national news and was on all of the news services, CNN and whatever. And the Texas Monthly wrote a very long profile. The Dallas Morning News did a big story on it, and probably within a year or so, Terry approached me and asked if I would help him write a book. By this time, I'd had several books published, and he had asked if I would help him write a book on it because he'd been approached by a number of true crime writers, and he wanted somebody that he knew and trusted rather to help him with that book. So I was delighted to help write that. It was called, it's still available. It's in fact, it's my only book that's still in print. It's called Terror by Night. And it's not an easy story, but it does tell the story from Terry's perspective. It's not a journalistic treatment as much as it is a memoir, but it's a hard story. But it's a story where God, really worked in Terry's heart and did some amazing things. Of all of the books I've written, again, that was probably the hardest one I've ever had to write.
Wow. All right. So can you give us the title again and where someone can find that book if they're interested in reading it?
Yes. It's called Terror by Night. And it's the author is Terry Caffey, Caffey, with James Pence. But if you go to Amazon, you can find it just as Terror by Night. It's available on Amazon. Any major bookseller will have it. It's still in print.
Okay. So you mentioned you've written 11 books, and you didn't really find your stride as a writer until you were 40, I believe.
Right.
Tell us how the inspiration came about for you to start writing the books, and when a lot of writing as a writer, I can tell you that it takes a lot of courage to write. No matter how good of a writer you are, you always think there's somebody who won't like it and who will be critical.
Yes.
So how did you get past all of that, and what inspired you to finally just let go and start writing for publication?
Okay. Well, I wanted to, again, when I decided I was going to be a writer, I wanted to be a novelist because I love reading fiction. And so that's where I actually started teaching myself. And I studied novel writing. And I specifically wanted to write for young adults. So I would buy young adult novels and I would mark them up. I would see what the author was doing as I read them. I looked for just the different fiction techniques. I read a ton of books on fiction writing, and ultimately wrote a little young adult novel that I titled Friendly Revenge. And it basically gathered dust on my shelf. Couldn't find a publisher for that one. And so I figured, well, breaking into the young adult market, and I had somebody who was working as an agent for me, and who tried to sell it, and it made the rounds of all of it was a Christian novel, and it made the rounds of all the Christian publishers, and ultimately just didn't go anywhere. So I said, well, I guess I'll have to write something targeted toward an adult market. And at that time, that was around it was just past 1997, 1998, when we had Comet Hale-Bopp and the Heaven's Gate cult tragedy. And it just intrigued me that a group of people were so dedicated to a cult leader that they would take their own lives just because the cult leader said that's what they needed to do. And so I decided to explore that, and I developed a number of different threads, partly the cult thread, partly I happened to hear a 60-minute piece on Scientology that the lead was, if you call the Cult Awareness Network to get information on a cult, you'll be answered by a Scientologist. And that told about how Scientology had sued the Cult Awareness Network into bankruptcy and had taken over the Cult Awareness Network. And so that kind of gave me the idea, well, what if you had a cult that wanted to do that on a large scale and infiltrate society on a large scale? And you had a group of dedicated people like the Heaven's Gate people. And then the third element was my protagonist was a young pastor who had lost his family in an automobile accident that he caused and was, riddled with guilt. And two children are dumped into his lap, and he has to rescue them from the cult. And so that was everything that came together to create the book that was ultimately titled Blind Sight. And I wrote that book. It got very good reviews from many people in the publishing industry that were in the know, that were friends of mine. And I sent it off to an agent, and the agent sent it back and said, I liked it, but I didn't love it. And so it didn't, it looked like it wasn't going to get published. It went on the shelf. And then I didn't know what I was going to do next, but about that same time, I had decided to leave pastoral ministry to do prison ministry work. And I had to earn a living somehow because prison ministry is very rewarding, but it doesn't pay anything. And so my brother-in-law taught computer languages, and he said, well, if you could put a little class together about HTML, the language that's used to write web pages, I might be able to get you a teaching gig, and that'll help pay the bills. So I began studying HTML, and I discovered that it's very intuitive because I am not a programmer and I don't have a mathematical mind, and but HTML you don't have to. So I began developing the class, and as I wrote up my outline for the class, I said, you know what, this looks like a book outline. And so I fired off 13 query letters to computer book publishers, and was basically pitching a book on how to do web pages written by a non-techie for non-techies. And and as a writer, you know this, after a while, you get kind of cynical. So I told my wife that I needed to get my query letters off quickly so I could get my rejection letters back. And and I got a lot of those, but I also got 3 responses, and one was from Osborne McGraw-Hill. And they said, well, we have a series that would fit into just perfectly. Would you be interested in writing it? And so I had my first book contract writing a computer book, and with a $12,000 advance, which was not too bad.
Not too bad.
About halfway through, I literally taught myself HTML as I wrote the book. And about halfway through, I saw that the companion language, cascading style sheets, seemed to be pretty intuitive. So I proposed a book on that, and at the same time. And so I had a follow-up contract right on the heels of the first one. And that was pretty much the extent of my computer book knowledge. I gave up after that because that was all I knew how to write about. But those 2 launched me into the publishing industry, got me an agent who was able to sell my novel Blind Sight. He actually had 3 Christian publishers competing for it. And I got pretty much a sweetheart deal. It I was being pushed as one of the new suspense thriller authors, and had visions of being the next, John Grisham or whatever. And it didn't happen. Didn't get a lot of sales, but enough sold that I think it sold about 8,500 copies, and for me that was good. And and it's still available. It's now under the title Unseen, and I'm actually planning on doing because this is the 20th anniversary of the writing of that book. I'm planning to do an 20th anniversary edition here probably within the next year, and just updating a few things and giving maybe some behind the scenes information on that book. But so anyway, I went from there to being a collaborator, and whatever kind of, I actually liked being a collaborator better because I didn't have to worry about marketing my books. All I had to do was write the book, and it was the author's responsibility to do the marketing, because that's the hard work.
Wow. Okay, so you've been a non-techie author writing about techie stuff. You've been a singer who lost your voice before a competition. You've been an author of other things, of other subjects, and you're also a chalk artist.
Yes,
not a choke artist, because that would be a slap at the Dallas Cowboys, and we don't want to get into that here.
We won't go there today. Tempting as that might be, and for the record, folks, I am a Dallas Cowboys fan, but yeah, an embarrassed fan today. So,
and also for the record, I'm a native of Houston, and when you grow up in Houston, all things Dallas become enemy territory, and vice versa. So
exactly.
It's something you grow up with. So that's a different subject for a different episode. So let's talk about your chalk art. Can you tell us about that and how important that is in your ministry efforts?
Yes, I got into performance chalk art, and if you don't know what that is, I have a 7-foot tall easel, and I draw a 3-foot by 4-foot picture in 15 minutes while people watch, while an audience watches. And the picture always tells a story, but the climax of the story is a hidden blacklight picture. I draw an invisible picture with what's called literally invisible fluorescent chalk. You can't see it under regular light, but when you turn on a black light, there are about 20 different colors, so you can draw a full picture that people can't see until you want them to see it, and that's always drawn up in the sky. And I actually had seen chalk artists before. There was a very good one at the college that I went to, Dallas Bible College, and it had always interested me, just because my dad was an artist, and I've always loved drawing and art growing up. But I never really seriously considered getting into that until I was a youth pastor down in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And when I was a youth pastor, the first summer, the speaker at the summer camp was a chalk artist, and I saw how well it communicated to the kids, and I thought, well, that might be something I can use in my own ministry. So I had him give me a few pointers, and I went and built what I literally call a monstrosity of an easel. God has given me many gifts, but building things is not one of them. And so it was pretty grotesque looking, but it did stand. It didn't fall down on me, and I began drawing. And over the years was able to take classes from two of the best chalk artists in the world, and really was able to develop my talent and ability. But things got very interesting when I was invited to take that talent into a Texas prison, and that was the Wynn unit down in Huntsville. It's one of the old red brick, very imposing looking units, and I was invited to go there by actually one of the inmates that I had been corresponding with, and it turns out he knew the chaplain. In fact, he was a chaplain's assistant, and he said, "Would you like to come in?" And I said, "Well, sure," because I'd always told God, if you keep me in chalk and paper, I'll draw wherever you open a door. And so he invited me to come in, and I was nervous because I hadn't had so much as a parking ticket that time of my life, so I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I could go down to the prison and the chaplain would be there to give me some sense of security. And about a week or so before I was supposed to go in, the chaplain called me and said, well, Jim, I've got to have gallbladder surgery on the very day that you're supposed to come in. But don't worry, the guys will come out and you'll have a good time. And I always say that's what I was afraid of. So I showed up at the at the Wynn unit down in Huntsville, and 2 inmates came out and helped me carry all my stuff in. And this is one of the old units. They actually have a church building, which most of the new ones don't have anything like that. But a magnificent chapel building in that prison. And so I set up, and the band started playing when the service started, and the guys started singing, and I have never heard anything like that in my life. As a pastor, you're used to people singing and sometimes getting a little half-hearted in their singing of the hymns, and these guys sang like there was no tomorrow, and they had a pretty awesome band. And what really struck me was they had a greeting time, just like a lot of churches do, where you stand up and shake hands. And by that time, I'd gotten over my fear. And so I walked down to one side of the room to shake hands with some of the guys. And about 50 guys reached out and wanted to shake my hand. And that just blew me away, because I wasn't famous. I wasn't I wasn't some star that came in. I was just a regular person. And these guys were so, hungry for someone to care about them that they wanted to shake, my hand. And when I walked out of the prison that day, I said, God, I don't know what your plan is, but I'd like to do more of this. And so that kind of began my journey into prison ministry. And I did begin to do more of it, got more opportunities to go into units, and that really made up the large part of my ministry for the next 20 years or so. Not quite 20 years, but because I started that in about 1995, 1996. And so, yeah, pretty close. But I just over the years have loved going into prison units, and people have always asked, well, aren't you afraid? Aren't you nervous? And I say, I feel more secure in there than I do on the streets sometimes. It's just like the guys are always respectful. In fact, I remember going into a unit up in Bonham, Texas, and I noticed that the correctional officers seemed to be more on edge than usual when I was going through security. And and when I did my program, I noticed there were correctional officers, again, standing in the room, which they often didn't in that particular unit. And just everything seemed different. And after then, the program went fine, no problems. And once I went out, as I was going through the Sally Port, the officer in there who hadn't seen me coming in, but she said, well, I'm glad it was you here today, because there was some stuff that was supposed to go down, but they wouldn't do it when you're here. They like you. And so it was like, okay, well, that's good to know that. But it's just, I think the most transformative thing going into a prison was realizing that there, but for the grace of God, go I. These are human beings. These are men and women just like you and me. And, they want to be loved. They want to be cared for too. And, so I haven't gone into a prison really since before COVID, and probably won't now. I've lost most of my contacts, and so that's kind of a chapter that's closed, but it's a chapter that I always treasure.
Wow, that's pretty remarkable. So we're sort of winding down our time here for this episode, but I want to allow some time for you to just talk about some other things that you enjoy doing. We've talked about your writing, your drawing, your singing, and your preaching with the prison ministry. What are some other things you're interested in doing, just as a hobby or sharing in your community and with your family?
Well, in terms of a hobby, back in, it was roughly when I turned 60, one thing I've always enjoyed is rocks. And I got into, I've always wanted to collect rocks. I've always wanted to tumble rocks. When our kids were growing up, I always talked about, we're going to get a rock tumbler and we're going to polish rocks. And we never did. And when I turned 60, I said, if I don't do that soon, I probably am never going to do it. So I bought a tumbler and started getting rocks and polishing those. And after I had a fairly sizable collection of polished rocks, somebody asked me, "What are you going to do with all those?" So I said, "Well, that's a very good question." And so I started wire wrapping, and so now I make wire wrapped pendants and gem trees, and pretty much if you can do it with a rock, I will do it. I'm also a digital artist. I enjoy chalk art, and I enjoy everything that goes with that. But about 2016, I decided, again, really enjoying the tech end of it. I'm not a techie, but I like technical things, and I like computers and iPads and all of that. And I wanted to see how well I could draw with an app or with a tablet. And so I got a small iPad and started drawing, and that has really become the primary way that I do art now is digitally, and I have about 5 different apps that I work with, depending on the kind of effect I want to get. And I recently plugged into a new gallery here in Greenville and have prints of my work there, and just sold 2 prints over the last couple of weeks, and so been pretty excited about that.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty awesome. Oh, go ahead. Sounds like you were about to say something else.
I was just going to say, with my family, we take care of our 4-year-old. Excuse me. Let me start that again. We take care of our 7-month-old granddaughter, and that's 4 days a week. My wife really does the work. I just get to play with her. So our daughter and granddaughters live right next door, and we have a son out in Colorado Springs, and he and his wife have a 14-year-old daughter. So we have 3 granddaughters that we love seeing, and family is very important to us. So we enjoy whenever we can get together. And again, we live out here in the country, so on our little 4 or 5 acres, we have trails, and I like taking our little dog out on a walk. I don't get out a whole lot anymore, but I enjoy doing that. So.
Well, having grandkids nearby is almost a full-time job, but it's the most fun job you can never have. I've got a 3-year-old granddaughter who lives with us, so I get to experience that too. It's a lot of fun.
It's pretty good. The grandparenting gig is great. Really enjoy that.
I've said it on a couple of previous episodes. There should be a way of becoming a grandparent first. People are going to get tired of hearing me say that, but
yeah,
if they're not a grandparent yet, when they become one, if they're fortunate enough to become one, they'll understand. If they already are a grandparent, they already know.
Exactly.
All right, so James Pence has been our guest today, and we're thankful for the stories that he has shared with us. So, James, thanks for being here. I appreciate the way you're using your adversity in life to help others and motivate and inspire them. So, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and best wishes for your continued podcast, and maybe we will get to see the Astros and the Rangers face off here the way things are looking here. So that should be interesting.
Well, by the time this episode airs, we already know if they're there. It would be the middle of the series. All right. So again, thank you, James, for being here. That's it for today's episode of Real Life and Other Fantasies. Join us again next time for another storytelling adventure. Until then, don't forget to shine some light wherever you go. That was another edition of Real Life and Other Fantasies with your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Join us again next time for more stories about more things than you can imagine. Some of those true stories may even be about real life. See you next time.